Welcome to our deep dive into happiness itself. Today we'll be exploring The Art of Happiness by the Dalai Lama and psychiatrist Howard Cutler.
A fascinating blend of personal anecdotes, scientific research, and Buddhist philosophy.
Right. We're often told that external achievements lead to joy. But what if the key to lasting happiness lies within?
That's a question the Dalai Lama tackles head-on. He challenges the idea that happiness is solely determined by external factors, arguing that it's more about our internal state of mind.
That reminds me of the saying, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it. Is there scientific evidence to back this up?
Absolutely. Research on adaptation shows that our happiness levels tend to return to a baseline after both positive and negative events. Think about it. That initial thrill of a new car wears off, and the sting of an argument with a friend fades.
So winning the lottery wouldn't actually make us happy in the long run.
A windfall might bring temporary joy, but our happiness levels would likely return to their pre-lottery state. The key is that we have more control over our happiness than we realize. By working with our minds, we can cultivate a more positive and resilient outlook no matter what's happening around us.
So instead of chasing fleeting pleasures, we should focus on inner peace and contentment.
Exactly. The Dalai Lama argues that genuine happiness comes from inner strength and compassion, allowing us to navigate life's ups and downs with greater stability.
It's like Cutler asks the Dalai Lama if he ever gets lonely. And his answer, no, never.
It seems counterintuitive given his solitary life as a monk.
It does.
But his reasoning is rooted in compassion. He feels at ease with others because of his profound sense of understanding and empathy.
But how can the average person develop such profound compassion? It sounds like a lofty goal.
The Dalai Lama offers practical steps. First, he suggests recognizing that compassion isn't merely a sentimental feeling. It's a valuable tool for creating positive connections.
So it's not just about being nice. It's about understanding that compassion benefits us.
Precisely. And he encourages us to actively foster compassionate thoughts, which over time can lead to a genuine shift in our attitude towards others.
So it's about retraining our minds to see the good in people even when it's hard.
Exactly. Finally, he suggests taking the initiative in creating positive interactions. Instead of waiting for others to reach out, we can extend a hand of friendship first, reducing our own fear and fostering openness.
So if I'm feeling isolated, instead of waiting for someone to invite me to lunch, I should invite someone else.
Precisely. It's about shifting from a passive to an active approach in cultivating meaningful connections.
This makes me think about love. Western culture idealizes romantic love. Is that always healthy?
The Dalai Lama says this idealized love built on fantasy can lead to frustration and heartbreak. A more grounded approach based on affection, compassion, and mutual respect is essential for lasting happiness in relationships.
So those Hollywood rom-coms set us up for disappointment.
In a way, they do. They perpetuate the myth that romantic love is a magical solution to all our problems.
This brings to mind the term collapsing ego boundaries that Cutler mentions. What exactly does that mean?
Psychologists use this term to describe the blurring of lines between our sense of self and another person's. Some believe it's rooted in our desire to recapture the unity we experienced as infants with our caregivers.
We're seeking a return to that primal sense of oneness. That's intriguing. How does this play out in adult relationships?
Let's look at an example from Cutler's clinical practice. He describes a patient named David who initially sought therapy for depression. David fell head over heels in love. He thought he'd found his soulmate and a cure for his unhappiness.
So the relationship became his sole focus for finding happiness.
As David tried to deepen the connection, his partner started pulling away.
Oh.
This led to the relationship's demise, sending David spiraling back into despair. His idealized expectations of romantic love caused him immense emotional pain.
So is it possible to build healthy, lasting relationships without idealization? I think we all crave that deep connection. But maybe we need to be more realistic in our expectations.
That's a topic worth exploring further. The Dalai Lama offers insights into building relationships based on genuine intimacy and respect, which we can discuss later.
Now let's pivot to a more challenging topic: suffering. As Viktor Frankl said, man is ready to shoulder any suffering as long as he can see a meaning in it. How does the Dalai Lama view suffering, particularly in the context of finding happiness?
He believes that accepting suffering as an intrinsic part of life is crucial for coping. Instead of viewing it as an anomaly, we should understand that suffering is universal and teaches valuable lessons.
That's easier said than done. How can we apply this acceptance when facing problems that seem insurmountable?
The Dalai Lama compares reflecting on suffering to a military exercise. By familiarizing ourselves with hardships in advance, we build resilience, which allows us to remain stable when they arise.
So it's like preparing for battle by training rigorously so we're not caught off guard.
Exactly. He also suggests analyzing the roots of our discontent, recognizing that in our daily lives, suffering often outweighs joy. By understanding the causes of our suffering, we can address them proactively.
That's a little bit sobering. But I see how facing suffering head-on can lead to self-awareness and growth.
Hmm.
Is there any benefit to this kind of introspection for those of us who aren't Buddhist monks?
Absolutely. Acknowledging the role of suffering can motivate us to make positive changes and pursue happiness. It's not about wallowing in misery, but using suffering as a catalyst for personal transformation.
So it's about harnessing the energy of suffering and redirecting it towards creating a more fulfilling life.
Indeed. The Dalai Lama believes that facing suffering with courage and wisdom can lead to personal growth and ultimately greater happiness.
So we've talked about accepting the inevitability of suffering, but uh, what about practical strategies for cultivating happiness? If it involves eliminating negativity, where do we even begin?
The Dalai Lama has a three-step process. First, education and awareness, understanding the impact of negative behaviors.
It's like recognizing the effects of unhealthy habits on our bodies, but applied to our mental and emotional states.
Precisely. Once we grasp negativity's harmful nature, we move to the second step, deepening that awareness into conviction. This goes beyond intellectual understanding. It means developing a strong determination to change.
It sounds like moving from knowing something's bad to genuinely wanting to break free.
That's a great way to put it. Lastly, consistent effort is key to establish new habits. This is where we replace negative reactions with more skillful responses.
This reminds me of the Dalai Lama's emphasis on urgency when it comes to personal transformation. It seems to contrast with stereotypical views on Asian passivity, don't you think?
Indeed. It highlights the importance of taking ownership of our happiness and not delaying our efforts. He also stresses sincere motivation and honesty in overcoming fear and anxiety. He even says he experiences pre-lecture nerves despite decades of public speaking.
It's comforting to know that even the Dalai Lama experiences those human moments of vulnerability. It makes me wonder, though, what role does the spiritual dimension play in achieving lasting happiness?
He postulates that all major religious traditions offer valuable frameworks for enduring suffering and discovering meaning in life. He sees faith as a wellspring of strength, hope, and purpose, especially during tough times.
But doesn't religious belief sometimes lead to conflict and violence? Think about the unrest in the Middle East. Does the Dalai Lama address this seeming contradiction?
He acknowledges that religious belief alone isn't a guarantee of peace or happiness. Institutions can be misused, leading to harmful consequences. However, he emphasizes cultivating basic spiritual values like compassion and kindness, even for non-believers.
So striving to be a good human being is crucial regardless of our religious beliefs.
Precisely. It's about embodying those universal values in our daily lives.
This begs the question, can you be truly spiritual without adhering to any religion? Now let's discuss intimacy. How does the Dalai Lama's perspective on this differ from the Western viewpoint?
Western culture often equates intimacy solely with romantic relationships. The Dalai Lama proposes a broader understanding encompassing all human connections.
Are you suggesting that we can experience intimacy in friendships, family relationships, or even brief encounters?
Absolutely. He recounts an experience in Delhi where he met a persistent shoeshine hustler. Instead of brushing him off, the Dalai Lama chose to engage in conversation, learning about the young man's life.
That's a refreshing approach compared to annoyance or indifference.
It underscores a profound point.
Yeah.
By recognizing our shared humanity, we can find moments of intimacy in unexpected places.
I love that, like discovering hidden gems of connection. But let's circle back to romantic relationships. We talked about the downsides of idealized love. Does the Dalai Lama offer guidance on building healthy partnerships?
He emphasizes choosing a partner based on genuine affection, compassion, and mutual respect. Physical attraction might initiate the spark, but these qualities sustain the flame.
So appreciating our partners for who they are, flaws and all, instead of projecting fantasies.
Precisely. He cautions against relationships built solely on sexual desire or the intensity of falling in love.
This makes me wonder if those whirlwind romances we see in movies might actually be...
Lack stability and depth. He argues that authentic love requires mutual respect, shared values, and a commitment to growth.
This makes me think of Cutler's point that Western culture confuses pleasure with happiness. Can you explain that?
Absolutely. The Dalai Lama asserts that while sensory pleasures bring temporary gratification, they don't inherently lead to lasting happiness. True happiness arises from cultivating inner peace and positive mental states. This then permeates our relationships.
So cultivating happiness from within rather than seeking it externally.
Exactly. It's an inside-out approach prioritizing inner transformation. Now back to suffering. We've touched on accepting it as inherent. However, how do we manage negative emotions?
That's a question I grapple with often. It's one thing to understand accepting suffering, but putting it into practice is tough.
The Dalai Lama offers a three-step process for navigating these emotions. First, he emphasizes education, understanding the destructive effects of these emotions on ourselves and those around us.
So recognizing that anger might feel good, but ultimately creates more suffering.
Precisely. Second, we deepen awareness into conviction. This means developing a resolute determination to change, moving beyond understanding and embracing an emotional commitment.
Shifting from "I know this is bad" to "I'm committed to breaking free." Is that accurate?
Absolutely. Lastly, consistent effort is key, actively replacing negative reactions with skillful, constructive responses.
This requires self-discipline and dedication.
He acknowledges that change takes time, dedication, and effort. He emphasizes cultivating patience and tolerance, especially when dealing with difficult people.
He even suggests viewing adversaries as teachers, which seems
He
counterintuitive.
challenges conventional wisdom. He believes difficult individuals give us chances to practice patience, tolerance, and compassion.
So instead of getting caught in conflict, we use those experiences for personal growth.
Precisely. It's about reframing our perspective, recognizing the lessons in challenges. Now let's explore spiritual practice. The Dalai Lama says all major religious traditions offer frameworks for meaning and purpose, even amidst suffering.
However, organized religion often has baggage like dogma, judgment, and violence. Does the Dalai Lama acknowledge these downsides?
He does. Religious institutions can be misused, leading to harm. However, he emphasizes that true spirituality is cultivating fundamental human values: compassion, kindness, forgiveness.
So it's not about blindly following rules, but embodying those universal values in our lives, regardless of religion.
Exactly. He also highlights meditation's power for calming the mind, nurturing self-awareness, and accessing inner peace.
Meditation seems daunting for many. What advice does he give those who aren't seasoned practitioners?
He emphasizes that meditation isn't about superhuman feats. It's about training the mind like we train our bodies. He suggests starting small and gradually increasing duration. Consistency is key, not perfection.
This resonates with me. I've always been drawn to spirituality, but never fully embraced one path.
He suggests that profound spirituality can exist without adhering to any religion. He believes true spirituality is cultivating our capacity for love, compassion, and wisdom regardless of our beliefs.
That's empowering. It suggests multiple paths to spiritual fulfillment. Now let's delve into the self. Western psychology sees it as fixed and independent. How is the Dalai Lama's perspective different?
He challenges that notion based on Buddhist philosophy. He says the self isn't static, but a fluid, interconnected process.
So instead of a noun, it's more like a verb, an ongoing process.
Brilliant. He explains that our sense of self is shaped by countless factors: experiences, relationships, thoughts, emotions, and our bodies.
This is fascinating and complex.
Yeah.
If the self isn't fixed, what is it? How do we define it?
He suggests thinking of the self as the act of experiencing, perceiving, and engaging. It's not something we have, but something we do.
This challenges the idea of a separate self and points to our interconnectedness.
Precisely. It highlights that we're not isolated, but parts of a vast, interconnected web.
That's a profound shift. Does this understanding help us cultivate compassion?
Absolutely. By recognizing our interconnectedness, we appreciate the shared human experience, fostering understanding and compassion. Now let's discuss anger, often seen negatively. How does the Dalai Lama's perspective differ?
We're told to suppress anger, to calm down, or let it go. Does anger have a place in a happy life?
The Dalai Lama says anger, like all emotions, can be beneficial or harmful depending on its motivation. He believes in healthy anger, like anger fueled by compassion to fight injustice or protect loved ones.
The anger we feel witnessing mistreatment or injustice.
Precisely. He distinguishes between anger from concern and anger from ego. But even righteous anger can be destructive if not channeled well.
So how do we make sure our anger doesn't lead to harm? How can we harness it positively?
The Dalai Lama emphasizes patience, tolerance, and wisdom. When anger arises, pause, examine its root, and consider the consequences before reacting.
Responding mindfully instead of reacting impulsively, choosing a better response.
Exactly. He also stresses cultivating humor and perspective. Humor helps us detach from rigid viewpoints, see the absurdity of our reactions.
Don't sweat the small stuff. Finding humor in challenges diminishes their power.
Precisely. Cultivating perspective helps us reframe challenges and avoid negativity. Now, fear is another universal emotion. The Dalai Lama acknowledges fear can be motivating in danger, but cautions against letting it rule us.
That makes sense. How does he differentiate between helpful and unhelpful fear?
He distinguishes between fear from real threats and fear from mental projections and anxieties.
So fear of public speaking is different from fear of a bear chasing you. One's a real threat, the other is imagined.
Precisely. When fear surfaces, examine its validity. Is there a genuine threat, or are we catastrophizing? If a real threat exists, focus on taking action, not succumbing to fear.
Courage isn't the absence of fear, but action in the face of fear, focusing on what we can control.
Exactly. He emphasizes that action is often the best remedy. But what about general fears, like fear of failure or the unknown? How do we approach those?
Those can be incredibly debilitating.
He suggests they stem from a lack of self-confidence. We fixate on negative possibilities. He emphasizes cultivating self-compassion, acknowledging everyone makes mistakes, and viewing failures as growth opportunities.
So instead of berating ourselves, we learn to embrace imperfections.
Precisely. Shifting from self-criticism to self-acceptance and growth. Now, self-esteem is highly valued in Western culture. What are his thoughts on this?
We constantly hear about its importance for happiness. It seems like whole industries are built around boosting self-esteem.
He offers a nuanced perspective. While acknowledging a healthy sense of self-worth, he cautions against ego and arrogance.
So there's a line between self-confidence and inflated self-importance.
Exactly. True self-confidence comes from understanding our strengths and limitations, recognizing our interconnectedness.
It's not about ego, but a grounded and compassionate sense of self.
Precisely. Genuine self-worth shouldn't depend on external validation, like achievements, possessions, or approval. It comes from within.
That's powerful. We don't need to achieve things or gain approval to feel worthy. Now, self-hatred is a difficult topic. How does he approach this?
He acknowledges many struggle with inadequacy, worthlessness, and self-loathing. He suggests self-hatred often comes from a distorted self-view, fixating on flaws.
Looking in the mirror and only seeing imperfection.
Exactly. He stresses cultivating self-compassion, treating ourselves with kindness, like we would a friend.
So challenging negative self-beliefs and replacing them with loving thoughts.
Precisely. He also suggests reflecting on our innate goodness. This cultivates a more positive self-view.
Instead of focusing on what we're not, we can appreciate our worth.
Exactly. Recognizing our potential for goodness even with imperfections. Now let's discuss religion and spirituality. As a spiritual leader, he offers a unique perspective.
What are his thoughts? Does he think religion is needed for spiritual growth?
He says all major religious traditions offer valuable avenues for spiritual development and peace. He stresses respecting diverse beliefs and recognizing what unites us.
But religion often divides people, fueling conflicts. How does he reconcile this?
He acknowledges that religious institutions can be misused, justifying violence. He highlights the importance of separating authentic spirituality from distorted manifestations.
So it's not about dogma, but embodying compassion, kindness, and understanding.
Exactly. True spirituality lies not in rigid doctrines, but in cultivating love, wisdom, and ethical conduct. He also suggests profound spirituality can exist without religion.
You don't need to be Buddhist, Christian, or Muslim to live a meaningful life.
Precisely. True spirituality lies in our capacity for love, compassion, and wisdom, regardless of beliefs.
That's liberating. Spiritual fulfillment is accessible to all. Now, impermanence is central to Buddhist philosophy. How does he view this?
He emphasizes that everything is constantly changing. Recognizing this impermanence helps us detach from rigid attachments. We embrace life's flow.
So instead of clinging to things, we appreciate each moment.
Exactly. He highlights using our time wisely, recognizing life is precious and fleeting. Engage in activities that spark joy, cultivate relationships, and contribute to the well-being of others.
Making the most of life, recognizing each moment as a gift.
Precisely. Living with intention and purpose, embracing the present. Now let's dive into consciousness. He offers a perspective that challenges conventional understandings.
Okay, I'm ready. What insights does he offer?
He states that consciousness isn't just a byproduct of the brain, it's fundamental to reality, inherently luminous and pure, though often obscured by thoughts, emotions, and conditioning.
Like a clear sky, even when there are clouds. Our true nature is clear, even if hidden.
A beautiful analogy. He emphasizes that through meditation and spiritual practices, we cultivate awareness, uncovering our consciousness's true nature.
Peeling back mental clutter to reveal clarity and wisdom.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that our true nature isn't defined by fleeting thoughts and emotions, but by a deeper awareness beneath.
That's empowering. We all have the potential to access this deeper awareness. Now let's talk about karma. Often misunderstood. How does his perspective differ from what goes around comes around?
He presents a nuanced understanding rooted in Buddhist philosophy. Karma isn't fate or predestination. It's the natural consequences of our actions.
Not about an external force judging us, but the cause and effect of our choices.
Exactly. Every action creates an imprint on our minds, influencing future experiences. We can't change the past, but we can act skillfully in the present, shaping our future.
That's powerful. We can create a positive future through our choices.
Precisely. It emphasizes living with intention and awareness, recognizing our actions' impact.
Now let's address death, a topic often met with fear and uncertainty. How does he approach this?
He emphasizes that death is not the end, but a transition. Contemplating death and its inevitability helps us live more fully now and reduces fear of the unknown.
Accepting death as natural rather than resisting or fearing it.
Exactly. He also stresses living ethically and cultivating compassion, recognizing our actions have consequences beyond this lifetime.
So making choices that benefit others, recognizing our actions have a lasting impact.
Precisely. By living a purposeful life, we can approach death peacefully, knowing we've lived by our values.
That's comforting. We prepare for death not by fearing it, but by living fully and contributing to the world. Now let's talk about intimacy. How does his view differ from the West?
He sees intimacy more broadly than the West, which often limits it to romance. He believes intimacy exists in all human connections.
So in friendships, family, even brief encounters.
Absolutely. He tells a story about a persistent shoeshine hustler in Delhi. Instead of ignoring him, the Dalai Lama talked with him, learning about his life.
It's powerful how we can connect in unexpected places.
It highlights that we're all human and connected.
Let's go back to romantic relationships. We talked about the problems with idealized romance. Does the Dalai Lama have advice for building healthy, lasting partnerships?
He stresses choosing partners based on affection, compassion, and mutual respect. While attraction can start things, those qualities help relationships endure.
So appreciate partners for who they really are instead of who we want them to be.
Precisely. Avoid relationships built only on desire or infatuation. They need more to last.
This reminds me of Cutler's observation that the West confuses pleasure with happiness. Can you explain that further?
The Dalai Lama says that while sensory pleasure is temporary, it doesn't bring true happiness. True happiness comes from inner peace and positive mental states.
Cultivating happiness from within.
Exactly. Now let's think about suffering again. We've discussed acceptance, but how do we deal with the negative feelings suffering brings up?
It's hard to put acceptance into practice.
The Dalai Lama has a three-step process for negative emotions. First, understand that they're destructive.
Like realizing that unhealthy habits are bad for us physically.
Yes. Then move towards a real desire to change. Deepen awareness into conviction.
Going from this is bad to I'm going to change this.
Yes. And finally, put in the effort to change those reactions.
This reminds me how the Dalai Lama stresses urgency when it comes to personal growth. It's not what people expect.
He's saying we need to take responsibility for our own happiness. He also stresses honesty and motivation. He even admits to being nervous before he speaks.
It's good to know that he has vulnerabilities too. Speaking of challenges, what does he say about spirituality and happiness?
He says that all the major religions can help us find meaning even when things are hard. Faith gives us strength, hope, and purpose.
But what about the conflict and violence we see in religion?
He acknowledges that just believing doesn't guarantee peace. Religions can be misused. But he emphasizes the basic values like compassion and kindness, even if you don't follow a religion.
So it's about being a good person regardless of your beliefs.
It's about putting those values into practice.
So can you be spiritual without religion? Let's move on and talk about intimacy. What's the Dalai Lama's perspective?
He has a broader view than Western culture, which equates intimacy with romance. He includes all human connections.
So friendships, family, and even quick meetings with strangers.
Yes. He tells a story about meeting a shoeshine hustler in Delhi. He didn't ignore the man, but instead had a conversation with him.
That's different from what most people would do.
It's about seeing our shared humanity. We can find intimacy in unexpected places.
We talked before about the problems with idealized romance. Does he have advice on building healthy partnerships?
He says to choose a partner based on affection, compassion, and mutual respect. Attraction might bring you together, but those other qualities will keep you together.
Appreciate your partner for who they really are.
Exactly. He says to avoid relationships based only on desire because they often don't last.
Cutler said that Western culture confuses pleasure with happiness. Can you explain that?
The Dalai Lama says that while pleasure can feel good, it doesn't lead to lasting happiness. True happiness comes from inner peace.
So work on yourself first.
Right. Now let's talk about suffering again. We've talked about acceptance. But how can we manage the negative emotions?
It's hard to actually practice acceptance.
The Dalai Lama says there's a three-step process. First, learn about how destructive negative emotions are.
Like understanding that unhealthy habits are bad for your physical body.
Exactly. Then you have to really want to change.
Going from knowing something is bad to wanting to change it.
Right. And the final step is to put in the effort to change how you react.
That takes a lot of self-discipline.
He knows that change takes time and effort. He says to focus on being patient, especially when dealing with difficult people.
He even says to look at difficult people as teachers.
It's a challenge to think of it that way, but
Yeah.
he believes we can learn patience and compassion from those people.
So use those interactions for growth.
Right. Now let's talk about spiritual practice. The Dalai Lama says that all religions can help us find meaning in life.
But religions can have problems too, with dogma and even violence. Does he talk about that?
He knows that religion doesn't guarantee peace, but he stresses the importance of basic values like compassion and kindness, even for people who aren't religious.
So be a good person.
Right. He also talks about meditation and how it can help us find inner peace.
Meditation can seem difficult. What would he say to people who haven't done it before?
He says that you don't have to be an expert. Just start with small practices and slowly do more.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
I've always been interested in spirituality, but never really followed one path.
He says that you can be spiritual without religion. It's all about cultivating love, compassion, and wisdom.
It's encouraging that there are many paths to spiritual growth. Now let's talk about the self. Western psychology sees the self as something fixed. What did the Dalai Lama say?
He says that the self isn't static, but a process.
So it's not a noun, but a verb.
That's a good way to put it. He says our sense of self comes from many things: our experiences, relationships, thoughts, and emotions, and even our bodies.
That's really interesting. So if the self isn't fixed, what is it?
He says to think of it as the act of experiencing. It's something we do, not something we have.
But we're all connected.
Exactly. We're not isolated individuals.
That's a big change in perspective. Does that help us have more compassion?
Yes. When we realize that we are all connected, it helps us understand each other better. Now let's talk about anger. It's often seen as a negative emotion. What's the Dalai Lama's take on anger?
We're always told to suppress our anger. Is there a place for anger in a happy life?
He says that, like all emotions, anger can be good or bad. It depends on the reason for the anger. He thinks there is such a thing as healthy anger.
Like anger at injustice.
Yes. But even that type of anger can be destructive if we don't channel it correctly.
So how do we do that?
He says we have to practice patience, tolerance, and wisdom. When you feel angry, stop and think about why you're angry. And then think about what will happen if you act on your anger.
So be mindful instead of reacting without thinking.
Exactly. He also says that humor and perspective can help.
Not taking yourself too seriously.
Right. Now let's talk about fear. He says that fear can be motivating, but that we shouldn't let it control us.
How does he tell the difference between helpful fear and unhelpful fear?
He says there's a difference between fear that comes from real threats and fear that comes from anxiety.
So being afraid of public speaking is different from being afraid of a bear chasing you.
Exactly. When you feel fear, think about whether the threat is real. If the threat is real, then focus on what you can do about it. Don't just panic.
That reminds me of the saying, courage isn't the absence of fear, but action in the face of fear.
Exactly. But what about fears that aren't related to a specific threat, like fear of failure?
Those fears can be hard to deal with.
He says that those fears come from a lack of self-confidence. He says we should focus on having self-compassion. Everyone makes mistakes, and failures are opportunities to learn.
Don't be so hard on yourself.
Right. Let's talk about self-esteem. It's a big deal in Western culture. What does he say about that?
We're told that we need self-esteem to be happy.
He says it's good to have healthy self-worth, but that we shouldn't be egotistical.
So there's a difference between confidence and arrogance.
Yes. True confidence comes from understanding your strengths and weaknesses.
So it's not about thinking you're better than everyone else, but about knowing yourself.
And true self-worth comes from inside you, not from other people.
So you don't need to achieve things or have people like you to feel worthy. Now let's move on to a harder topic. Self-hatred.
He knows that a lot of people struggle with those kinds of feelings. He says that they come from focusing only on our flaws.
Like when you look in the mirror and all you see are your imperfections.
Exactly. He says that we have to practice self-compassion, treat ourselves the way we would treat a friend.
So try to think positive thoughts about yourself.
Yes. He also says to think about your good qualities.
So focus on your strengths.
Right. Now let's talk about religion and spirituality. He has a unique perspective on this.
Does he think you need to follow a religion to be spiritual?
He thinks that all the major religions can help people grow spiritually. It's important to respect all beliefs.
But religion is often divisive and causes conflict?
He knows that.
Yeah.
But he says true spirituality is about compassion, kindness, and forgiveness.
So those are important whether you're religious or not.
Right. He also talks about the importance of meditation.
Meditation can be intimidating. What would he say to someone who's never tried it?
He says it's like exercising your body. You don't have to be perfect. Just start small and be consistent.
I've always been interested in spirituality, but never followed a specific religion.
He says that you don't need to follow a religion to be spiritual. It's about love, compassion, and wisdom.
That's a good reminder that there are many paths to spiritual growth. Okay, let's talk about the self. Western psychology thinks of the self as something fixed. What does he say about it?
He says that the self isn't fixed or permanent, but a fluid and interconnected process.
So the self is more like a verb than a noun.
That's a good way to put it. He says that our sense of self is shaped by many things. Our experiences, relationships, thoughts, emotions, and even our bodies.
That's fascinating. So what is the self then?
He says that it's the act of experiencing, perceiving, and engaging with the world.
It's not something we have, but something we do.
Exactly. And it means that we are all interconnected. We aren't isolated.
That's a profound idea. Does understanding that help us be more compassionate?
Absolutely. It helps us understand each other better. It highlights that we're all human and we all go through similar things. The key is to learn how to handle those experiences.
So what does he have to say about spirituality and happiness?
He thinks all of the major religions can help us find meaning. Even when we're going through tough times, faith gives us strength, hope, and purpose.
But doesn't religion sometimes lead to conflict?
He knows that religion doesn't guarantee peace. Religions can definitely be misused. But he stresses basic values like compassion and kindness. He thinks those are important even for people who don't follow any religion.
So it's about being a good person no matter your beliefs.
Exactly. It's about putting those values into practice.
Could you be spiritual without religion? That's something to think about. Let's change gears a bit. What about intimacy? What does the Dalai Lama have to say about that?
Western culture often equates intimacy with romance, but he has a broader view. He includes all kinds of human connection.
So friendships, family, even quick meetings with strangers.
That's right. He tells a story about a shoeshine hustler in Delhi who kept trying to get his attention. Instead of ignoring the man the Dalai Lama talked to him, he wanted to learn about his life.
It's an interesting way to approach that kind of situation.
It's about recognizing that we are all human. We can find intimacy in unexpected places.
We've talked before about the problems with idealized romance. Does the Dalai Lama have any advice about how to build healthy relationships?
He says to choose a partner based on affection, compassion, and mutual respect. Attraction is important at the beginning, but those other qualities are what will make a relationship last.
So you should value your partner for who they are.
Right. He says relationships that are based only on desire usually don't last.
Cutler said that Western culture mixes up pleasure with happiness. Can you talk more about that?
He says that although pleasure feels good, it doesn't create lasting happiness. True happiness comes from inner peace.
So we should focus on working on ourselves.
Right. Now let's go back to suffering. We've talked about how important acceptance is, but how do we actually deal with the negative emotions?
It's hard to put acceptance into practice.
The Dalai Lama says there are 3 steps. First, learn about how destructive negative emotions are.
It's like when we learn that unhealthy habits are bad for our physical body.
Exactly. The second step is to actually want to change.
To go from knowing something is wrong to wanting to change it.
Right. And the final step is to actually put in the effort to change how you react to things.
That's going to take self-discipline.
He knows that change takes time and effort. He says to practice being patient, especially when you're around difficult people.
He even says to think of difficult people as our teachers.
It's a challenge to think of it that way.
Right.
But he believes those are the people who can teach us patience and compassion.
So we can use those interactions to help us grow.
Right. Now let's talk about spiritual practice. He says that all religions can help us find meaning in our lives.
But religion can sometimes be negative with dogma and violence. Does he address that?
He knows that religion doesn't automatically mean peace, but he emphasizes basic values like compassion and kindness. Those values are important even if you aren't religious.
It's about being a good person.
Exactly. He also talks about how meditation can help us find inner peace.
A lot of people are intimidated by meditation. What would he say to them?
He would say that you don't have to be an expert to meditate. Just start with small practices and be consistent.
That's good advice. I've always been interested in spirituality, but never felt drawn to one specific religion.
He says that you don't need to follow a religion to be spiritual. True spirituality is about love, compassion, and wisdom.
I like that. It means that there are many paths to spiritual growth. Now let's talk about the self. Western psychology says that the self is fixed and permanent. How is that different from what the Dalai Lama says?
He says that the self is not fixed or permanent. He says it's a fluid process that's always changing.
It's more like a verb than a noun.
That's a good way to think about it. He says our sense of self comes from a lot of things. Our experiences, relationships, thoughts, and emotions, and even our bodies.
So what is the self then? If it's not fixed?
It's the act of experiencing and perceiving and engaging with the world. We don't have a self. We do self.
It's about action. And this means that we're all connected. We're not isolated.
That's right.
It's a big shift in perspective. Does understanding that help us have more compassion for others?
Yes. Realizing our interconnectedness helps us understand each other, and that can lead to greater compassion.
This deep dive has provided so much food for thought. Before we wrap up, is there a way to sum up the key takeaways?
We've covered a lot, but the Dalai Lama's wisdom on happiness can be distilled into 10 essential points. First, remember that happiness is an internal state. Don't expect external things to make you happy.
It's about mastering our inner world.
Second, cultivating compassion is essential for creating genuine connections and overcoming loneliness.
It's about extending kindness and understanding to ourselves and others.
Third, idealized romantic love often leads to disappointment. Instead, seek relationships grounded in affection, compassion, and mutual respect.
We should ditch the fairy tale expectations.
Fourth, suffering is a part of life. Accepting this helps us become more resilient and find growth in the face of adversity.
Learn to navigate difficult experiences with grace.
Fifth, patience and tolerance are the antidotes to anger and hatred. Cultivate the ability to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively.
So it's about creating a space between a stimulus and our response.
Sixth, to overcome fear and anxiety, first determine if your fear is valid. If it is, take practical steps to address it. If not, practice self-compassion and see failures as learning experiences.
Face your fears and learn from your mistakes.
Seventh, cultivate a healthy sense of self-worth that is not dependent on external validation. Embrace your imperfections and celebrate your unique strengths.
It's about recognizing that we are inherently worthy.
Eighth, explore the spiritual dimension of life. Whether through organized religion or personal exploration, cultivate compassion, wisdom, and inner peace.
Nurturing our connection to something greater than ourselves.
Ninth, recognize that everything changes. Use your time wisely to create a life of purpose and meaning.
It's about making the most of our time.
And lastly, forgiveness frees us from anger and resentment. Choose compassion over bitterness to create space for healing.
Choosing compassion helps both ourselves and others.
These 10 points offer a concise overview of the Dalai Lama's teachings.
What a journey. I feel like I've gained a lot of insight.
Right.
Before we end, the Dalai Lama says that even negative experiences can lead to more compassion. What do you think our listeners can take from that idea?
That's a great question to think about. The path to happiness is a journey. Embrace the challenges, be compassionate, and find what makes your life meaningful.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.